Okay, welcome back to the Are You Strong show. I have a great guest on today, calling in from Texas on a nice Friday afternoon. But this young woman, what do you hear her background? Went to University of Texas, majored in biology, got her master's degree from Baylor University in exercise physiology, went on to coach and teach in high school for a number of years, in volleyball, powerlifting, and track. Went on to TCU, big time, powerful athletic university, as an assistant strength and conditioning coach for a number of years in the volleyball side, women's basketball, and women's golf. Back to the high school world for a while, where she was the head strength coach for 6 years for 13 different programs. That's a lot of teams to be working with. Um, is the director of sports performance at Fieldhouse Volleyball Club, and she's an author of a book called Developmental to Division One for strength and conditioning for volleyball athletes. So, welcome to the show, Missy Mitchell McBeth.
Thanks for having me.
I'm glad you're here, and that's a heck of a track record.
All I heard is you said young lady, so that's all I needed to hear for the day. So
Well,
thank you
yeah,
for that.
well, compared to me, you're young. Um, but before I ask you a bunch of questions, Missy, the audience is probably wondering who is this young lady? So can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so you kind of covered career-wise. On a personal level, I'm born and raised in Texas, lived here my whole life. Started off in Central Texas, went to school, played volleyball at UT Permian Basin, which is kind of how I got my start in the sport of volleyball and training it and all that kind of stuff. I'm currently in the DFW area, as you mentioned. I'm the director of sports performance for Fieldhouse Volleyball Club. I also run my own business, Missy Mitchell McBeth Sports Performance, which is about coach kind of consulting and education in the strength and conditioning space, trying to take the complexity that is strength and conditioning and scale it to something that's usable for sport coaches and practical in their various contexts that they work. I'm married. My husband's also a coach up at Crum High School. He coaches football and baseball. And then we
Oh,
have
great.
four dogs. As we discussed before the show, we have four rescue dogs, one of whom is joining us, and three of whom may shout from downstairs at any moment.
All right. So how competitive is it under your roof, being that you're both coaches?
Competitive, I guess, at what?
And anything, do you race to walk the dogs? Do you race to do anything? Is everything like who can do one up on each other or no?
I think we get a lot of that out of ourselves in the workday, so we don't feel the need to compete against one another.
Okay.
It actually is more of like collaborative of what issues do we face in our coaching world. My
Okay.
husband's super level-headed, where I am not always. So it's really good to run any issues or conversations or potential conversations that I'm thinking of having by him to
Yeah.
kind of get his perspective because he's been where I've been coaching for 20, 21 years. I think he's in year 24 or 25. So it's
Okay.
less competition and more collaboration from a coaching
Okay.
perspective.
Now, did he play in college too?
He played collegiate baseball for a couple years.
Oh, good. Okay. Cool. So I always start out with, especially for those who have played collegiate sports, the world has changed. College sports today, Missy, it's just a pure business today. And the recruiting is just hectic as hell. And they got to start putting some guardrails on it sooner or later. The money is ridiculous. But can you go back to your recruiting days when you were getting recruited out of high school? What was that like? Was it stressful? Were your parents involved? Was it all on you? What was it an easy process? How did that go for you?
Yeah, so the great thing about being a truly mediocre athlete is that you didn't have to do any of that kind of stuff. I basically went to tryouts. So I went to, I think, either four or five different tryouts with NAIA schools and JUCOs. And really, it was a lot about just finding the right fit because, you're there on campus, you're meeting with the other teams, you're meeting with the coach. What was stressful in my process is my senior year, I got mono. And so I got really,
Mm,
really sick. And so not only did I miss some of those windows because again, like I wasn't being hotly recruited junior year, I didn't have any guidance as far as, my parents hadn't played sports. We really hadn't had anyone from our school play collegiately. So our coaches really didn't know anything other than handing us a form and say, hey, fill these out and hopefully we get a call back, which is where
Yeah.
got the opportunity for those tryouts and stuff. But I missed some of that window because I was sick. And then actually, the school that I ended up signing at, he called me one day after I'd tried out with an offer. And I was like waking up on the couch because, like, I'd make it through the school day and then come home and then just crash for 2 hours. So my mom's like waking me up, like, coach is on the phone. And I'm like, ugh. And he puts my name in the bottom of the stack because he didn't think I sounded interested.
Yeah.
And so then I didn't hear from him for a couple weeks and I called back and he was like, "Oh, I didn't think you were interested." And I was like, "No, I was literally just sick as a dog." And that's what you heard in my voice. Plus, I'm just naturally monotone, as it's been pointed out many times in my life anyway. So really, like, I didn't have the whole like sending my film everywhere and all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. It was like an in-person tryout. Okay, you fit in well here, and then
Yeah.
let's go from there. So completely different than today's landscape of paying
Yeah.
thousands and thousands on a recruiting service and, on someone to cut my film and doing all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff.
Now, what division was that?
NAIA.
Okay, good.
Mhm.
So when you showed up as a freshman, right? You're 18 and you're there with 22-year-olds, maybe 23-year-old young women now. What was that like your first day on campus, showing up, and here I am now with some of these girls are 4 or 5 years older than me.
I can't, one, you're asking me a question from 25 years ago. And it's funny because one of the girls that was there on campus, I now coach with her up at the same club after all these years. I don't really know. Like, I can tell you from the perspective of, because again, that was so long ago, but I can tell you that from the perspective of someone who coached at the collegiate level, the gap in understanding between a collegiate freshman and a collegiate, junior, senior, fifth year senior is the speed of the game,
Yeah.
right? Where in high school, and maybe I encountered some of this myself at the time, I just don't remember it, having enough emotional impact to remember it today, but it was like, you're not the best player in the gym anymore. Everybody else is just as good, if not better. Plus, they have 2, 3, sometimes 4 years of playing experience at that game speed. So
Yeah.
it's like it can be like a kick in the teeth to people when they encounter their first practice, when they get on the court for their first game. And it's like if you're not physically prepared for that, you're in for a very rude awakening as an
Yeah.
incoming freshman, particularly in, again, this is not relevant to my career, but in today's space where a coach can go into the transfer portal and preferentially recruit a developed athlete versus an 18-year-old untested kid coming out of high school.
Yeah. And it's got to be mentally stressing, for the young girls coming in at 18 and they're competing against the 22 and on top of the speed, right? So when I mean, you've coached at high school, you coach at the club level, college level. How, if you put all that together, all those experiences, like how did that all shape your philosophy on strength and conditioning? How did you build that?
Yeah, so I don't know as far as like the X's and O's. I don't think it really changed. Like it's always been very principle based. But the main thing is just learning to be flexible in your approach. Because a
Hmm.
lot of it comes down to, collegiate level, I had 8 hours a week to train these
Yeah.
kids. Moving to the high school level, I might get an hour if I'm lucky. So it's like what those the needs of the athlete may be similar in that they play the same sport, but the environment that I'm training them in is tremendously different. Or moving from having 12 athletes that I'm working with, per team to now having a group of 30 or 40 freshman volleyball players.
Yeah.
So really just being flexible in your approach from, kind of the methods that you use, the time that you have, and then also just simplifying things because,
Hmm.
constraints can be all over the place. Like you can't go in with these complex systems and try to apply it to a novice athlete, or in some scenario where the schedule's changing all the time, because that's what I encountered at the collegiate level is it's like I'd have these programs and coach was like, "Oh, nope, we're watching film today." And I was like, "We're
Yeah.
going to move weights to tomorrow." And I'm like, "Well, that now changes instead of game day minus 2 days, we're now lifting game day minus one. I have to change my approach. So I think a big piece of it over time is just learning to be more flexible, which for me
Yeah.
as a human being, like I want things done A, B, C, and D. So that was a huge challenge, like where for other people it might be like, oh yeah, I was just flexible from the start. Like that was a
Yeah.
learned trait for me.
Yeah. So you're pretty structured.
Sometimes, yeah, most of the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. All right. That's good. So how did you end up focusing solely on volleyball? I mean, you coached a couple of different sports, right? How did you end up like saying, hey, volleyball is a sport?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, like I have a background playing it.
Yeah.
This morning I was on the beach court in my friend's backyard. So I still play beach volleyball today. So it's really just kind of my lifestyle. However, when and I did it, I coached high school volleyball. I then transitioned and I was coaching collegiate strength and conditioning, indoor volleyball being one of the sports that I worked with. So you would think like all that, like, oh, that's why I focused on it. But when I went to the high school level, I was working with, as you mentioned in my intro, 13 different sports. So what I didn't want to do is be seen by those athletes, by those coaches as specialized in volleyball, right? So I kind of like put out information and content and spoke about other sports or just sport general stuff. When I believe it was 2019 that Byron Nelson won their first state championship. And all of a sudden I start getting like all these phone calls from people, people that knew like I was both a volleyball player and then we'd had so much success and they're like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? What are you doing? And I was like, listen, people, like I work with all these other sports. I don't want to just focus on volleyball. And then finally, like I learned just like a tiny bit about marketing. And I was like, oh, well, if that's what everybody's asking of you, like you probably need to lean in and brand that thing and like tap into that niche because there's certainly a desire for it and a need for it. So it's kind of one of those things that was asked of me. I didn't necessarily choose it myself. And the ironic thing is, and I tell this story anytime people ask me this question, is now that I'm just like volleyball, blah, 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 volleyball this, volleyball that, like 9 out of 10 times I post something about volleyball, somebody's like, well, that applies to other sports too. And I'm like, I can't. I can't, guys. Like I literally spoke about every other sport for
Yeah.
years, and you told me to talk about volleyball, and now I talk about volleyball, and you're reminding me
Of
of
everything
why
else.
this applies to every sport. And so anyway,
But
I always find it
I'm
humorous.
I'm gonna guess though, Missy, that specializing in volleyball, it's got to be. I'm gonna guess it's got to be better. I mean, it's your background, it's your life, and it's. I think today everybody specializes in something, and I would imagine if I'm a volleyball player looking for a really good volleyball coach, I'm looking for a volleyball coach. I'm not looking for a coach who's coaches 12 other things. I'm looking for
True.
somebody who can get me to the next level, and that's all they specialize in. So I think what you're doing is good.
Well, from a selfish perspective, since I do love the sport, the conversations that I have with the coach are about a sport I love.
Yeah.
Watching practice, I'm interested in it because
Yeah.
I love the sport. Talking to my athletes, like
Yeah.
I have, both perspective to give to them about my experiences playing or currently playing or training or whatever. I
Yeah.
can have a different conversation with them that I can have with a soccer athlete or a football athlete, simply because, like you said, like I'm so deeply entrenched in the
Yeah.
sport.
It's your life.
Yep.
It's what you specialize in. So, but you coached at TCU. I mean, does it get much bigger than that as far as college volleyball goes?
At the time, so when I first started with TCU, we were Mountain West, and then we transitioned, I believe, in my third year to the Big 12. So I was there for which that was a very interesting thing to be a part of, is to
Yeah.
take, kind of that, again, Mountain West, I don't want to say lower level, but different conference recruit and take them into a Power Five at the time, now P4 conference.
Yeah.
But yeah, and they now obviously are having tremendous success this year on the
Yeah.
volleyball court.
Yeah. Now, did you take any like what did you learn from that experience? I mean, you were there what, 7 years?
Hmm.
I mean, that's a long time, especially in the college world today, to be in one school, right?
Yep.
And you were in that transformation from one conference to another. What did you take from that helped you going forward?
Oh, That's tough. There's a lot of repressed trauma from that time period of my
Maybe
life
we
working
should
in
skip it.
collegiate athletics. Yeah. No, I think that a big take home, and this wasn't really a lesson that I think truly came to fruition for me until a couple years after I left, is that it's a job, not a hobby at that level.
Yeah,
And it's not for everybody. And I think that a lot of kids and a lot of parents think they have this aspiration or they have this potential to be at the D1 level. But if you don't take it seriously, every facet of your day has to be taken seriously. And
yeah,
it really isn't for everybody, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's lots of opportunities at Division 2, or you may just not be cut out for collegiate athletics, and that's totally
yeah,
fine. But I think
right.
that a lot of people, put too much stock in the Division 1 label and not enough stock in what is the best fit for the athlete. Because
Yeah,
when I transitioned back to the high school level, I said that lesson didn't like fully or come full circle for me. It was like the first year I kind of went in with a mindset of like, okay, I'm going to train these kids like they're D1 because, and some of them were like, I had a large number of Division 1 athletes there, particularly in the volleyball space, but other kids were just there because they liked their sport just
yeah,
for something to do in high school, or they liked the social aspect of it. And all of that's fine. But I kind of learned from that, like, you've got to tailor your coaching to your environment, not try to like pound, square peg athletes into round holes and make them be some level of seriousness that they're not.
right. I mean, at that level, most of those girls are on scholarship, right?
Yep.
I when I talk to so many athletes, we say, "Hey, you're a student athlete. Are you really a student athlete, or are you an athletic student?" It's like if you were going there just to go to school, or is the school going to pay for you to be there? No, there's paying for you to play volleyball. And how many hours a week were those girls putting in? A ton.
Yep.
And I think the traditional student, for no disrespect, they just don't understand the amount of time, energy, and effort that these college kids put in to their sport, for the school. And but they think the athletes walk around in privilege. I
Right.
say, listen, if you would come back and put the our cleats or your sneakers on and just put in one day of what we do, you probably wouldn't come back the next day. And all they see is the game, the glitz and the glamour of the game, and they don't understand what truly goes on behind the scenes in the weight room, the early morning lifts and runs and the injuries, and the mental stress, so it's crazy, right?
It is.
You know,
It truly, truly is.
so how has, I mean, you've been coaching for a number of years now. So how has your approach to coaching evolved over the last, say, 15, 20 years?
Oh man, I think the biggest thing has been, less X's and O's and more making it about the athlete in front of me. And because I think we talked earlier that I'm like very structured and I want things done a certain way. And I'm not saying that like I let athletes just run wild,
Yeah.
but at the same time, like I think I was so kind of in the mindset of like, what would I do in this situation? So my athletes should do everything that I would have done in that situation. And with that, I became like very controlling of the training environment. And I think there's definitely a place for that, right? Like you can't just let like 13 and 14-year-old kids like have all this like freedom of
Yeah.
choice in their training environment because they're going to make dumb choices. But I try to give my athletes a little bit more autonomy in training where it's like, okay, we give them some controlled choices. Would you guys rather, so like, let's say the training week's been cut short and we don't have a competition at the, on either end of it. We're supposed to have 3 workouts this week, but due to a holiday, we only have 2. Would you guys rather do workouts A and B or B and C? Like, makes me no difference. You
Yep.
guys pick, right? So just like little controlled choices like that, because I feel like you get better athlete buy-in.
Yeah.
from that versus trying to be this like dictator, like militaristic, with the understanding that yes, like some of these athletes do need tons of structure, and you do have to set the ones that are going to the collegiate level up for success in a structured environment. But I think that you have to like know your audience on those types of things.
Yeah.
So like as an example, moving into this club season, we know our 18s teams, the majority of them are going and playing at the collegiate level next year. We're going to train those kids harder. We're going to require more of them because that's what they need, that's what they want, versus some of our younger teams, they may not have that level of buy-in or they may not have that level of seriousness. We're not going to slack off, but we're also not going to like get so crazy down the rabbit hole of like everything on the whistle and all that kind of stuff that
Yeah.
they just
Yeah.
check out because they're just not, either mentally or emotionally, I guess, bought into that kind of system. So I
Yeah.
think it's really come in the form of seeing what the athletes need. How can I take what I know needs to get done and put it in a format that works better for them to get more out of them?
Okay. So where do you find the most enjoyment? Is it with the younger kids, the little bit older, the college kids? Like where does your heart beat the most?
Oh man, I can tell you where it doesn't, and that's middle school kids. No, so my I don't want to say favorite athletes, but we all know coaches have favorite athletes. My favorite time in my career was about a 2 to 3 year window with a couple groups of kids on my different teams at TCU. And I think that was not necessarily the age thing, it's the exposure that you have to kids at that level, where as a collegiate strength coach, I'm traveling with you. I see you at, at the time, 5:30 a.m. Like, so we see each other at our best in games. We see each other at our
Yeah.
worst in a training session at 5:30 where I'm running you because somebody was late or whatever it is. And so I think just the level of respect that I had for those athletes, for the work that they were putting in on the court, the work that they were putting in with me, the level of attention to detail that I required, the amount of accountability that I required.
Yeah.
Like, if you made it through 4 years with me at that time, like, I've got a lot of respect for you as a human being. And
Yeah.
I think that that created like a special, like, bond and connection between you. That being said, like, I love high school kids. I think they're super fun. Like they're silly, like the same dumb
Yeah.
jokes that I would tell 20 years ago, like still, pop off with them today. Middle school kids, a little bit rocky because there's just a lot at that age. Like
They're
there's,
still
there's a,
trying to figure it out.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I don't know that they get it figured out by high school, but at least they're a
Yeah.
little bit more level-headed. But I actually really like, so I work with as young as 11U right now. So 11s and 12s
Okay.
are super fun because they're just excited. Like they just
Yeah.
have energy, and like I look at them and I'm like, man, like at what age do we lose being a kid? I don't know, but like if I could just bottle some of the energy that they have on in my daily life, what a time to be alive, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question. Like, what age do we lose being a kid? I think part of that is determined by what's going on underneath the roof at home, right? And
Yeah.
two, like how tough is the coach? Because sometimes when the coaches are super tough, that silliness, that funness doesn't come out,
Right.
you know? So do you think you were or you are a tough coach, or you weren't, but you're tougher now?
Oh, I was way tougher like in the early phases of my career, and then also like when I was at TCU, like very much so. And then even in my first couple years at Byron Nelson, and then I kind of looked around and realized that for the majority of kids, that style of coaching wasn't working. I think a lot of times, strength and conditioning coaches, like we really like to pride ourselves in like discipline, accountability, all that kind of stuff. But you can only have the amount of discipline and accountability that the head sport coach has beyond a point. And so it was like I had a couple teams where the head coach, and no shot at them whatsoever, they just weren't as disciplined. They just weren't as structured. And that was fine. Their program was still successful. That was just their culture.
Yeah.
There's different ways to do things. But it's like I would come in with my culture, and it was so different from what they were doing on the field or the court that I finally realized like if I'm the only person like consistently trying to hold this standard, like that's not holding a standard, it's being an asshole. Because if then that standard's not being upheld, like when they're out on the court or the field or
Yeah.
whatever, like all of a sudden these kids are like trying to shape shift in different environments. And so it was like, obviously, we're not going to do anything unsafe. They're not going to be disrespectful. They're not going to be
Yeah.
lazy. But like some of the super like, oh, you have to be like, oh, you have to have no toes on the white line or whatever. Like, calm down. Like, if their sport coach isn't worried about that, like, I don't need to worry about that stuff.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was like, I guess what I'm saying is I've learned how to pick my battles
Yeah.
better as I've aged in coaching because it used to
Right.
be like every battle all the time. And now it's like, not everything is as important
Yeah.
as we thought it was when we were
Yeah.
young.
Well, do you think also just that coaching itself has changed? Because if you think about it, like if you look at the football guys, right? When I was playing, it was full pads all week long. Preseason was full pads for 3 weeks. Now, like, there's limited time you can be in pads. There's limited time you can be practicing. Everything's limited. And the coaches have realized that, it's more like what do the players want and need versus what the coaches want and need. I think it's almost like the coaches have been forced to lighten up. What do you think?
I think there's definitely some truth to that because we're in the era of gentle parenting, right?
Yeah,
So, like, it's hard to, particularly like at the high school level, there's some measure of it's hard to be super, super structured and disciplined because there's not support for it within the school,
yeah,
because there's not support from home.
yeah,
And I was really fortunate in the last school district that I worked in that our athletic director was like, yeah, no, we're not going to just do what parents want to do, right? And so, and he was very, like he was great at like we want to be successful, like we want to have high standards. So we didn't really have to necessarily worry about that. But I think that a lot of coaches just don't want to deal with things because of the potential repercussions from having to sit in 37 parent meetings and all
yeah,
that kind of stuff. So yeah,
yeah.
I think coaching has changed. I think in some ways it's changed for the better, right? It's more
Hmm.
athlete focused. But I do think that there are a lot of situations where standards are not being held,
Yeah,
accountability is not had, and I think that we're doing kids a disservice in the long run.
yeah,
Not even really from I think we all went back to the like, oh, well, how are you going to hold down a job when you're older? And it's like we can all certainly think of many examples of employees who are less than stellar, aren't accountable. But where I think it sets kids up for failure is like with dealing with actual life stuff.
yeah,
If you haven't had to fail, if you haven't had to overcome adversity at some point in your upbringing, like what's going to happen in your life when somebody dies, like, and you've never had to cope with anything because it's always
yeah,
been handled for you. Like
yeah,
those are my concerns are less about like the quality of workforce that we're putting out into society and
yeah,
more like the quality of life that that person
yeah,
has in the things that surround their work life.
yeah. It's just life skills,
Right.
versus sports skills. And yes, some of these young people, I don't want to say kids because they're not kids anymore when they're coming out of college. And they're young
Mhm.
men and women. Like you said it. They have it's been soft parenting, and then when you come across a tough parent, it's like rare these days. So but you said the word standards a couple of times. What kind of standards do you have? For your coaching program, what are your standards and expectations for when the athletes come in?
Yeah, I mean, a big one, really, it all comes back to like, how do we execute things, right? So it's very technique based. I used to be like super, we have to be standing here and like, and there's some of that still. I'm going to be all over the place with this answer. There's some of that because it's context specific, right? Like we can be a little bit more lax with the organization of our session with our older kids because they know how to train. But like my 11s and 12s, like they walk in the door and it's like you go to your spot.
Yeah.
And then that way you're 4 feet away from other people and you're not touching them and climbing all over them and, being a distraction.
Yeah.
And then it's like we're doing things at set times or whatever. And like if I'm talking, you guys aren't talking. So it's like, and I tell them, I'm like, I'm not going to yell at you. I'm just going to sit here and wait. And if we're here till 9:30 tonight, like I live 2 minutes away. So I don't have homework tonight. I mean, so really just your basic stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like be on time, which at the collegiate level was a huge standard for me. At the high school level, that was a standard, but the consequences of not meeting that standard were significantly less because those kids did not have the capacity in many circumstances to get themselves there.
Hmm.
And also because I would certainly never want a kid to put themselves in an unsafe situation because they were so fearful of the punishment of showing up late to a session. But being on time, being respectful, obviously like working hard, what does that look like? That can mean a million different things. To me, it is executing what I'm asking you to execute at the best of your ability every single rep. Like, don't waste reps while we're in here,
Yeah.
or
That's
just
great.
some basics.
Well, you said the word before, consequences, and I'm just gonna bring you backwards a little bit. If I go back in time when I was playing, if you were late, it was a major problem, and the consequences were really stiff. When you were coaching at TCU, were there any major time, hey, these guys, girls were late, or if this was missed, there was major consequence, or was it not too bad?
Um, so the easiest way to explain it is that it would be on a 4-year cycle. So there would be one kid late every 4 years because once that one kid was late and the punishment was implemented, that was 4 years worth of kids that would know what that felt like to go in that locker room and be like, get your ass to the weight room on time because we are not doing whatever it was. So I had a kid. It was the second day I'd taken over volleyball, and it was the second workout that I had with them. And she comes cruising in, and she's like 17 seconds late. And I look at her, and we've got the clocks on the wall. And I was like, I won't use her name. I was like, what time is it? And she was like, oh, my phone time is different from the clock. And I was like, really? Here's my phone. All phones are standard, same exact
Yeah.
time as it. Like, nice try, but no. So we go to the indoor and we do, I called them air raids. It was basically an up down on every yard line. And so they had to do down and back was one. They had to do four of those with an up down on each line. It was an 80-yard field in 15 minutes. I just made that time up on the spot because I was like, this is reasonable. And the rule was if anybody didn't touch their chest on the up down, I whistled it dead and we had to start it all over again.
Oh,
And so we get to like, there's like 13 minutes and 45 seconds, six up downs left to go. I mean, this kid is like struggling, right? There's three upperclass, and it's a freshman. She's 6'4". So it's like an up down for her is like 400 feet of movement or something
yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
She's also like 160 pounds. So there's three kids surrounding her, like, come on, get up, go, go, go. And I'm watching a kid over on this side that I know is going to make it or whatever. And as I turn back, I catch this kid with the three around her in my peripheral and she doesn't hit her chest. And I was like, ugh, like it's one of those moments as a coach, like,
Yeah.
I don't like the punishment workout either.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
like being the asshole. Like, I don't like watching it. I don't like tanking our training session for it. Like, my preference is we just showed up on time that day.
Yeah.
Everything went as planned, right? So, again, this is like out of the corner of my eye. But the thing was, I made eye contact with our setter. And so I could tell from her eyes that she
She knew.
saw me see it. And so at that point, and like there's this pause, like the whistle's in my mouth, and I'm like, oh God, here we go. So I like crank on the whistle, and everybody like everybody just drops to the turf, right? And because I was like, so and so didn't touch her chest, whatever. I was like, get on the line, start over. And I think I bumped the
Oh,
time up to like 18 minutes. Oh my gosh. And I'm like irate. I like blow a gasket. So then I'm like, okay, I got to scream at him for long enough to give him a little bit of a rest. So like nobody gets hurt, right? So some of
yeah,
that's calculated as a coach. Like you have to think about that, like
yeah,
conditioning tests, like you got to give them a lecture midstream so they make so the sport coach is watching and they're like, oh yeah. And
yeah.
like, you're helping the kids make it, even though they just think they're getting
They don't
lectured,
get it.
like,
Yeah, yeah,
right. And after the fact, like years later, they'll be like, oh, I see what you did there. So anyway, I like scream at him for however long. And then we have a kid that this is also like happened at 6 o'clock in the morning. Our athletic trainer's down in the training room. And the kid that was late all of a sudden just falls out on the turf, like, I can't see, I can't see. So, like, one of the kids screams at me. She's like, Missy, so and so can't see. And I was like, she better figure out how to see because the clock is running or whatever. And like, three girls go, like, scoop her up. They're like running with her, throwing her down on the turf. Like, and then all of a sudden, one of my other kids like, I start to watch her and I was like, okay, this is legit. Like, we've got a problem.
yeah,
So I like blow the whistle. I bring them all in and I'm like, listen, we're going to get this done. Like it's going to happen. Like I'm not going to like back down on the standard. I said, but we're going to be smart and I'm not going to get anybody hurt. Like we're not going to get anybody sick. Cause like at this point, I'm like, somebody's going to get rhabdo.
yeah,
Um, so anyway, I tell him, I'm like, we're gonna come back in tomorrow morning and we're gonna do it, which is like the worst imaginable thing that could happen because now they're sore the next day.
yeah.
Like if they
How
just
early do they have to
finished,
come in?
they had to come back in at 6 because that was the other fun piece is they're working that volleyball camp at TCU. So it's like they're also on their feet. I mean, it's just a disaster of it. It's
Yeah,
a disaster of a week for them. Um, anyway, long story short, they come in the next day, they easily knock it out. Kids have like scabs because I guess they were sliding on the turf or something. I
yeah,
was like, why are y'all all so? And the only reason I remember that is like 2 weeks later, like a kid's like, I need to modify this exercise because of my scabs. And I was like, okay. So she like writes down on her training card, she's like modified due to scabs. And like I can still see that like in purple ink, just as plain as day. So yes, the consequences were very severe. After that, miraculously, no one was late. And in fact, people were quite early
early.
often.
Yeah,
I am in no way advocating these practices for other coaches. I knew those kids could handle it. I knew nobody was going to get hurt or whatever. And
yeah,
I also cut it off when I was like, hey, this is getting a little bit dicey. But yeah, and again, like, that's where things have changed. Kids are not as used to, like, I grew up getting spanked. I grew up getting grounded. I grew up
yeah,
like getting, whatever the
yeah,
punishment was, whatever the crime was, punishment fit.
yeah,
Kids are just not used to punitive methods. And I don't always
yeah.
know that those are the most healthy ways to get points across. But a story that happened nonetheless.
And you did team punishment too, which makes it even more powerful,
Yes. Yeah.
versus okay, let the one girl run and let her pay the dues. It's not as powerful if the whole team's doing it.
That same kid I got to run, we were on a trip in Italy. We did a summer, you go play 10 or so matches or whatever, and she got caught doing something on the trip. A rule that wasn't made by the coaching staff, she broke, and then they punished her after the fact. So I'm sitting in a gym in Italy, like making her run stairs, and I'm like, why
Oh,
am I in charge of this? Like, I didn't make this rule or enforce it. And so, like, everyone in the gym, because like they don't do that in Europe,
yeah.
apparently. Everyone in the gym is like staring at me like I'm this evil human being, and I'm like, I swear, like this is not even my thing. So yeah.
It's a good story. I would imagine you must have told that story a lot.
Mostly the kids remember it.
Yeah.
Occasionally I'll post something about like using exercise as punishment or whatever, and they're like, really, really, you don't believe in that anymore, Missy? I'm like, listen, times are different now, peeps.
Well, this leads into my next question because in your program and in the things that are out there for you, you talk about injury reduction,
hmm
right? And but when you talk about injuries in volleyball, is there a more common injury that you see a lot? And if so, like what's the best way to prevent it?
Yeah, so I actually just did a presentation to some parents over like what the common volleyball injuries are. So it's lower extremity stuff. So ankles and knees are the studied ones. I can tell you anecdotally, working with a high school population, you also rack up a lot of shin splints.
Yeah.
You get low back injuries, and then the sport is obviously notorious for shoulder injuries. From a prevention standpoint, I actually saw a really good line the other day where it's like if you can prevent it, that means you could predict it, and no one can predict an injury, so therefore we can't prevent them. So that's why when you see me posting stuff, it's generally about injury reduction versus prevention. Biggest thing is making sure kids have capacity to tolerate load, right? So, like with the sport of volleyball specifically, you have year round practice, year round competitive schedule. And kids, for the most part, are just playing a single sport. So, there's tons of overuse injuries. With that, because they're not playing multiple sports, we need to have some form of strength and conditioning consistently applied across their training year. If you want to break down like a specific injury, so ankles are huge in volleyball. I've had one athlete that I trained consistently, one athlete across my career that like missed one game due to an ankle injury, and like the rest for the most part like we've had healthy ankles. And my approach to that is, one, we get them out of their ankle braces for training. I get them barefoot when I can and the surface allows it, to kind of strengthen that foot and ankle complex. We do a lot of different variations of light tier or extensive, so kind of like low amplitude plyometrics. So we'll go forward, backward, laterally, we'll go in circles around curves, diagonally, we'll hop on and off of slanted surfaces. Because you'll see people doing like rehab style exercises where they're standing on inflated surfaces or on pads, and it's like maybe that does something, but the reality is these ankle injuries are occurring at speed with a lot of force in sports. So if we're not
Right.
doing something in training to expose our athletes to those forces and to those speeds, we're not really moving the needle from an injury reduction standpoint. And
Okay.
while those things are specific to the ankle, we can extrapolate that concept out to all the joints, right? So shoulders, it's like people want to go do all these band shoulder exercises for 10 to 15 reps. Not saying that's wrong, but what I'll tell you is there's not enough force there to replicate the demands of the sport. So if they're not lifting, if they're not doing heavy pressing exercises, heavy pulling exercises, again, we're doing something, but we're not doing anything from a holistic perspective to
Yeah.
reduce those injuries. And then a lot of it boils down to the sporting movement itself. Like, are they being taught, like with the arm swing specifically in volleyball, are they being taught proper swing mechanics? Because you can handle a lot of arm swings if they're done with good mechanics. If they're done with bad mechanics, you're relying more on the shoulder or you're relying more on the low back. That's when you see injuries crop up.
Yeah. So you think is there maybe some misconception, or like you just said, around volleyball conditioning as a whole? Like it's just more the game versus the strength and conditioning that goes behind it?
So I think, misconceptions that you run into in the volleyball space really are that, you have a lot of coaches that, for whatever reason, are very fearful of load. They're very fearful of this concept of lifting like a football player, which like strength and conditioning professionals like make an absolute mockery of that line, because it's like, what does that mean? Like, is there a football squat and a volleyball squat? And what people mean when they make that statement is lifting heavy with no regard for form. So it's like they're worried about their kids going in and like maxing out on every session and using
Yeah.
bad form and getting hurt because of that. But it's like, just because you see that in some football weight rooms doesn't mean that's football style lifting. And it certainly doesn't mean that you should be fearful of load. So it's like you have that situation where it's like people don't want to load, so they go do all these like little band exercises, which again, time and a place. I do some of that prehab type stuff in my program, but that's like the 10 to 20%, and like the heavier lifting stuff is the bigger piece to that. The other misconception with it is that we can't fit it in because we're training and competing year round. Like and we shouldn't lift during season because we don't have time. Like that is one of the most harmful takes in any year round sport that can be applied to an athlete, because it's like there is no off season to develop them. So if we're not dosing in strength and conditioning throughout the training year, they're just not getting it. And like there's so much research behind injury reduction and progressive resistance training programs. And then from a performance standpoint, like there's so much research behind strength and how it relates to the vertical jump, how it relates to speed, how it relates to change of direction. So I think those are the big misconceptions is, people being fearful of load, and then people just relegating training to the off season when the off season doesn't really exist.
Right. So then your book comes out, right? What was the inspiration behind the book?
Getting people to stop asking me the same questions about training over and over again. No. Yeah, I mean the book is really about I've got a bookshelf over here to my right side, and then I have a stack of books beside it that are mostly strength and conditioning. And it's like we have all these strength and conditioning resources out there. They're great. Most of them are written for the model where there's an in season and off season, and how do we peak for that, and how do we
Yeah.
train during our off season and then reduce loads, or when we have all of this time, or when we have appropriate coach to athlete ratios. I wanted to write a book that was relevant in the world in which high school coaches, high school players, club players, parents operate, where it's like, okay, here's the ideal circumstance. Here's really what's going on. How do we train within that? And I wanted to make it a book where it was simple enough and easy enough to read that anybody could pick it up and apply it. So versus being like a really dry, like it's a fun book. I think it like, I mean, if I obviously I'm an author, so I'm biased, but if I pick it up, I think it takes me about 2 hours to read cover to cover. Now, I don't have to
Okay.
read it like I go back and read it over again because I
Yeah.
wrote the dang thing, right?
Yep. Yep.
But that was kind of the target, is to kind of get really simplified information into the hands of as many people as you could, because, in my lifetime, I can coach, we'll say 1,000 athletes. It's probably been more than that, but for purposes of discussion, I can coach a
Yep.
thousand. But if I can give that book to 100 coaches and they each use it with 1,000 athletes,
Yeah.
well, now all of a sudden we've scaled and we've made progress in the
Yep.
volleyball strength and conditioning space.
Yeah. The ripple effect just continues to expand,
Yep.
right? So you just said, th thousands of athletes, right? Which you've probably touched, like you can't count them. And this is a tough question, but is there any one success story that just like stands out? Like this girl was just dynamite and she went on to whatever stardom?
Um, it's funny because like, when you work with those high caliber athletes when they're young, like when they're in high school, your job is to keep them healthy,
Yeah.
right? And then you watch them just go be successful at the next level.
Yeah.
So I don't really ever, there's just such a difference between a Division 1 athlete and everyone else. Um, so I don't even really like the stories of the kids that like, oh yeah, she played, for a national championship this year, or this kid played 6 rotations at a P4 university that I worked with when she was in high school. I think the stories that um, I'm more proud of in my career. I have a kid in my gym right now that when she came in, um, and she jumped over a hurdle for the first time, I kind of talked to myself and I was like, do you remember, Missy, you used to coach Division 1 athletes, and now what are we doing with our lives that we just saw that hurdle
Yeah.
jump? You know what I mean? Because
Yeah. Yeah.
it was bad, right?
Yeah.
And now it's like she's been training with me for almost a year.
Okay.
Um, and I can use her for demo videos like that I've
Wow.
put out in the world, and like she's just so much bouncier. And then more than that, she enjoys training, and she, without me like grinding on her and that kind of stuff. Like because
Yeah.
it's small group stuff, they're paying to be there. Like I have a different level of like, hey, this is your session. Like
Yeah.
if I see you skip a rep, like I'm gonna say something, but I'm not gonna just be like rah 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 college strength coach Missy. But she gives everything she's got every session, right? She likes to train. She's more confident. She moves better. So it's like to me, that's the success story because not only are we building a better athlete, we're also building a healthier relationship
Yeah.
with the sport, with training for a
Yeah.
lifetime. Because realistically, this kid's probably not going to go on and play in college. She's undersized and all that. But does she go on, like, does she have a great experience now? And then is she healthier when she gets older?
Yeah.
So I think that, I've had my time of working with Division 1 athletes. Of course, I'll work with some future D1 athletes and stuff.
Yeah.
But to me, it's more about like, what impact can you make with that kind of kid,
Yeah.
right? With a little bit lesser athlete. I think sometimes that's a little bit more of a challenge than it is to, oh, here's my future Division 1 setter. Cool.
Yeah.
Like, don't hurt her.
Yeah. So you're getting great satisfaction over a young girl who's developed, who's going to take your coaching and skill sets and probably just have a better life from that, versus just a
Absolutely.
sport athlete. So she's going to go on and have just a better life perspective.
Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure she will. So what kind of feedback do you get? Do coaches come back to you? Do other athletes come back to you and give you feedback on what they've liked about your program and what they've enjoyed?
Um, yeah, I mean, like from a programming perspective or a book
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah, no, from either right from the book, if they read the book and they've gotten something from that, or from the coaching program that you're in, do you get a bunch of feedback?
Yeah, I mean, I think athletes over the years have always just appreciated, like, when the ones that did go make the jump from the high school to the collegiate level, like, felt prepared. Whether it was they felt more technically sound than, other incoming freshmen, or they didn't feel lost when they were coming in, or they understood what it was like to, consistently train and train within structure. Good feedback on that. Um, Coaches, I've really, with the coaches that I work with now, I think they've always appreciated just the really simplified programming that I give them and how much, like, so I'll do like consulting and custom programming. Like, I just sent off one of my programs for a collegiate team I work with. Um, and just the, I guess, like layers of support I provide. You know what I mean? Where it's like
Hmm.
I take the guesswork out of it for them, where they can just be like, okay, here's the program, here's how I implement it. From the perspective of the book, again, most people appreciate easy read, simple to apply. I take a lot of like high level strength and conditioning concepts and distill it down to a format that anybody can understand. But I
Okay.
always find feedback to be fairly skewed, right? Because the people that are coming to give you positive feedback are the ones that liked it, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
pretty rare that people are confrontational enough in these days to come back and be like, I hated your program when you coached me. I don't appreciate you now. I wish I never
Yeah.
had, you know what I mean?
They just don't come
So
back.
I take
Yeah.
that stuff with a grain. The positive feedback I take with a grain of salt,
All
understanding
right.
there's just as much negative out there probably. They're just not willing to say it.
Well, hopefully you're wrong on that, right? Hopefully, right?
We'll never
But
know.
how about overtraining? Is there any way that you can identify with the girls that, hey, she's overtraining? Is that possible?
Some of that gets into a communication piece of, working with their coach, or sometimes it's a parent. Unfortunately, sometimes, so let's take a high school club volleyball player because that's what I'm working with now, or flip it when I was at Byron Nelson and I'm working with that athlete as a high school athlete who also plays club. Very often the burden of responsibility to communicate falls on a child because they're the central hub of their experiencing club, they're experiencing the life stress, they're experiencing high school. And so, how do they feel? So, where possible, I like to communicate with coaches about their perspective of what the load looks like. Do we have tournament coming up? Because now I've got, 20 different teams I'm responsible for. I don't know the schedule all the time, right?
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
like just a quick conversation of we had a tournament this last weekend or we have one coming up. How do we need to modify our training? I look a lot at what athletes look like when they walk in the door. You can tell a ton based on if you start your warm up and everyone's like grunting and groaning to get their shoes off or to get down on the floor or back up off the floor for a warm up exercise. That's usually a pretty good indication that we're tired. If you have a team that's normally like off the rails with energy and they come in and they're super sluggish, those are just really, I mean, those are qualitative methods that we can use
Yeah.
to assess readiness and assess whether or not we're creeping into the maybe not over training, but too much load on them at their current time. I
Yeah.
mean, there's wellness surveys that you can conduct. It's not necessarily applicable to what I do in my space currently, just because I only
Yeah.
have kids for 6 months. The learning curve on getting them to report accurate information, the ability of me to go back and analyze that and make training decisions on the fly, really difficult. You can do readiness assessments from the standpoint of, testing vertical jumps or testing a reactive strength index to kind of see how kids are progressing or regressing as season goes on. So there's a lot of different ways you can do it. The most
Yeah.
practical one is just talk to kids. How do you feel today? I think that finding a few kids on the team that are, I've always called them indicator kids, because some kids are always going to be like, oh, I'm tired, I'm sore. Like I've got one kid
Yeah.
that I'm like, dude, you complain about something every time you walk in. I
Mm.
can't listen to you, but I can listen to this kid over here that,
Yeah.
you know, she never complains about anything. Well, all of a sudden she's hollering sore.
Yeah.
Now we probably need to look into modifying this session a bit.
Yeah. All right. So how about life skills or leadership? Does any of that come into play in your coaching where you think you really have to, I got to take a stop for a second and we got to get into some life issues here with the kids? Or do you end up seeing on top of that, hey, I see these girls as becoming leaders and I want to help them become even stronger leaders in what they're doing?
I think less so in my current role, just because, in the club setting, again, you may have kids for 6 months and never see them again. And you've got
Yeah.
two 30-minute sessions a week. And it's kind of like during those two 30-minute sessions, my job is to attempt to enhance performance.
Yeah.
And while all of that stuff is certainly important, it's going to have to fall on someone that has more contact
More.
hours
Yeah.
per week. Now, if there's something that comes up, I'll give an example. This is a very dark example, but I had a kid come in to a training session and she's like, did you know Coach so and so? Because she works at the school I used to work for. And or she goes there. She doesn't work there. And she was like, do you know Coach so and so? And I was like, yeah, of course. Like he was my boss for 6 years.
Yeah.
And she was like, he died.
Mm.
Okay, well, that's a really abrupt way to start a training session. And
Yeah.
also, like, given that no medical history and it was right after the end of school, like, my mind immediately goes to very likely that this was a suicide, right? So here's me. And then I even get a text message from the three of us shared like a little corner of the world, the third person that was in our little office block that's like, Missy, they're saying it's suicide, whatever. And again, all this is going on. I don't check my phone that much during training sessions, like if really ever at all, but given the circumstances. And so
Yeah.
I'm like trying to hold it together with these kids during the session. And then at the end of the session, I was like, I need to talk to y'all about something. And I was basically like, I don't know what happened with this situation. I was like, but when I hear something like this, my mind immediately goes to the potential that it was suicide. I'm like, so I want to tell y'all, and I basically like talked to him about, mental health and like kind of just reaching out for help. And I'm like, I want you to understand that like you can always send me a message or talk to me, like pull me aside afterwards. Like if something's going on in your life, and I'm like, also, you need to understand that a lot of the problems that you face as a kid seem really, really big, or the problems that you face in your life will seem really big in the moment, but they're just temporary. So
Yeah.
don't make a permanent decision to solve, quote unquote, solve a, temporary problem. And of course, and in no way am I trying to project what or why or how he did what he did or whatever. I'm not. So if anybody's listening, don't say that I'm sitting here and being like, oh, he had temporary problems. And, I'm
Yeah.
not at all
Yeah.
judging that. I'm
Right.
just presenting how I presented the information to the kids. So I think that when stuff pops up in a training session in the surrounding world, I think that's when I try to impart lessons like life skills,
Yeah.
leadership stuff, because to me, that's when the ears are open, is when it's relevant, when something's happened that's made it relevant to them that day
Yeah.
versus a post weight huddle where it's like, our topic today is on why
Yeah.
we stay behind the line or like whatever it is.
Right.
So I try to make it as relevant to them because I think a lot of times like we just talk at kids all the time as
Yeah.
coaches and we expect that they're just going to pick up these lessons when it only matters to them when it starts to matter and we
Yeah.
can't make the decision of when that's going to be.
Yeah. That was a tough one. Tough situation. Wow. So you've been doing this for how long?
Since 2004, so this is
Okay.
year 21.
21. And you got a long road in front of you, of many more years to touch many, thousands of more kids. This is a tough question because you're so young, but going forward, when it's all over, your coaching days are over, how do you want to be remembered?
That is a hard question. Um, and one I probably should have thought through because I thought my coaching days were over actually 3 years ago. I stepped away from coaching full time. Um, wow. Hit me at like the end of the show with a tough one.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing is like, did my athletes feel like I cared?
Hmm.
Right. Because at the end of the day, that's should be sports should be the vehicle through which we impact lives.
Yeah.
However it is, whatever impact we want to make, whether it's making them healthier, teaching them to deal with hard life circumstances, teaching them to work as a team. Sports are just the vehicle for that for most kids. Now, for some kids, sports are the vehicle to their lives, like go get a college education because I got a scholarship. But I think the biggest thing is like, in that, like, go flip it back to that severe punishment situation. Do they understand that I was doing that for them, to them, not for them, to them because I cared about them, right? Or was I just doing that because, like, in some way I was like, yeah, this is my room or whatever? I hope that they
Yeah.
see that that was to create structure, discipline, accountability that I felt
Yeah.
would better them in the long haul.
Which could be doing something for them. It's you're doing it to them now, but it's for them for later,
Sure. Yeah.
you know? So that's how I would look at it, right?
Yeah.
So Missy, we talked about a lot of stuff, and from the beginning through all the accomplishments you've had, the impact you're making. Is there anything we haven't touched on you think we should hit before we wrap it up?
Honestly, I don't really think so. We kind of hit a broad range of topics from
Yeah,
career history to some training stuff to, some, I guess, more of the qualitative side of coaching. So I think that's really
yeah.
about it.
So for those who want to reach out to you that might be listening in different areas in the volleyball world and they want to talk to you, hire you, work with you, how can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, easiest place probably for someone to find me is on social media. So Twitter and Instagram, at Missy M. McBeth, MCBETH. I'm sure you'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
You can also go through my website, MissyMitchellMcBeth.com, and shoot me an email through that is the easiest way to kind of get in touch. And that has access to my book, my course, consulting, all that kind of stuff.
Okay. Now, do you travel as well, or do you stay local?
I travel if obviously that gets factored into payment and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. But yeah, I'm definitely willing to travel and come in and do basically in services for coaching staffs to kind of teach them strength and conditioning principles that they can apply, and those
Right.
types of things.
How about for the player development coaches at colleges? Are those the types of people you'd like to connect with?
Generally speaking, I go more into the high school and club market,
Okay.
simply because most collegiate settings have a full-time strength and conditioning professional on site. So
Okay.
there's not really as much of a need for that. But at the high school, middle school, club levels, very often it's the sport coach having to serve in the capacity as a strength coach. That's kind of where I work to fill those gaps.
Okay. Good. Great. Well, Missy, I appreciate the fact you're taking the time out of your Friday, to be on the show today. But your story is it's inspiring, and I can't wait to get this out there for all the young women to listen, and to hear the impact that you're making on so many people's lives, and to get your book, read your book, and get some tips from that, how they can improve and develop not just as volleyball players, but as people, you
Well,
know.
awesome. I appreciate you having me on
Yeah.
today.
So yes, so thanks for being on, and looking forward to continued success. And what I always tell all my guests now is just remember to stay strong.
Will do.